Lamar Jackson is about to sign a record-breaking deal really soon. He's broken more records and has more accolades than most can count, but he's still missing one thing: a Super Bowl ring. Every time critics wrote off Lamar Jackson by saying he couldn't play the position or that he was just a product of a specific scheme, he went out and shattered something. Sometimes it was a record, other times it was a narrative, but the result was the same. His entire journey from Pompano Beach to the NFL record book stands as one of the most incredible stories in the history of the league. By the time we finish this, the way you look at his game is going to be completely different. Lamar grew up in Pompano Beach, Florida, where he was raised by his mother, Felicia, who took on the role of a single parent. When parents say she put in the work to help him reach the pros, they mean it literally, because she used to put on football pads herself to run drills with him in the backyard. Everything he became on a professional field afterwards started right there with his mother. Coming out of Boynton Beach High School, the recruiting services didn't see a superstar, ranking Jackson as the number 409th overall prospect in the 2015 class. He wasn't exactly a blue chip recruit getting blown up with calls from Alabama or Ohio State, which left him with two real offers to consider between Louisville and Florida. The Gators told him he would have to likely redshirt, but Louisville promised him a chance to compete as a freshman, so he chose the Cardinals and changed the face of college football forever. During that freshman year, he showed flashes of talent, including a 106-yard rushing performance in his very first game, and 5 total games where he crossed the century mark on the ground. But the real explosion happened in 2016, when his sophomore season became one of the most electric stretches any college football player has ever produced. He threw for over 3,500 yards and rushed for another 1,500, accounting for 51 total touchdowns, all while starting the year with 8 scores against Charlotte. Even in a loss against Clemson, he put up 457 yards and looked like the best player on the field, leading him to become the youngest Heisman Trophy winner in history. He followed that up in 2017 by throwing for 3,660 yards and rushing for another 1,600. He finished third in Heisman Trophy voting that year, despite putting up numbers that would have easily won him the award in almost any other season. The NFL was definitely watching his every move, but the thing is, not everyone was sold on his style of play. That skepticism was about to follow him all the way from the combine to the green room on draft night. The 2018 NFL Draft is one of those moments that looks completely different in hindsight, especially when you realize 31 picks went by before the Ravens finally moved. 4 quarterbacks were taken before Lamar Jackson even heard his name, with Baker Mayfield going first overall and Sam Darnold following at 3. Josh Allen went at 7, while Josh Rosen went at 10. Yet the Heisman winner, who had just put up back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons as a QB, was still sitting there. The criticism wasn't just about his mechanics or his accuracy. Bill Polian, who was easily one of the most respected talent evaluators in league history, publicly suggested that Jackson should switch to wide receiver to survive in the pros. Multiple teams reportedly asked him to work out as a receiver during the combine, but Lamar's response was a simple 4-word shutdown: "I'm strictly a quarterback." Baltimore finally traded up to grab him with the 32nd overall pick, which was the very last selection of the first round right before Philadelphia was about to go on the clock. You're welcome, Ravens fans. GM Ozzie Newsome had him on the board as a QB from day one because the Ravens saw the potential that everyone else seemed to miss. And Lamar was about to promise something to Ravens fans that night.
Get a Super Bowl out of me. Believe that.
Lamar spent most of 2018 backing up Joe Flacco, but when he took over mid-season, he went 6-1 as a starter and rushed for 695 yards in just 7 starts. The Ravens saw enough to know he was the future, though it was a disappointing end in 2018, losing to the Chargers in the wild card. Some were even calling for him to be benched at halftime during that game, but they stuck with him. The Ravens handed him the keys full-time going into 2019, and what happened next didn't just answer the doubters. It made every single one of them look ridiculous. The Ravens didn't just hand Lamar the starting job going into 2019, though. They actually tore down their old playbook and built an entirely new offense around his specific skill. Coordinator Greg Roman designed a run-heavy scheme that used Jackson as the central weapon in ways that the league had never seen before from the QB position. What Lamar did with that freedom was genuinely unprecedented, and every game showed a player who was playing a different sport than everyone else on the field. He finished the year with 36 touchdown passes and 1,206 rushing yards, leading the NFL in both categories as a quarterback in the same season. Only one other player had ever done that before, and that was Hall of Famer Steve Young back in 1994. Though he did it with nearly 1,000 fewer rushing yards on the ground than Lamar. He also broke Michael Vick's single-season rushing record for a quarterback, which was a mark that had stood for 16 years, and he managed to do it with 4 games left in the season. The Ravens finished 14-2 because Baltimore had the number 1 offense in the league, averaging a massive 33 points per game. When the MVP vote finally came in, Jackson received all 50 first-place votes to become only the second unanimous MVP in NFL history after Tom Brady did it in 2010, becoming the youngest to ever win the award in the process. The eye test matched every single number on the stat sheet, and if you watch that Monday Night Football game against the Rams where he threw for 5 touchdowns and ran for 95 yards, you can see the league genuinely had no answer for him. Defensive coordinators were drawing up complex schemes defense all week just to get shredded the moment the ball was snapped. The 2019 Ravens were the most dominant regular season team in football that year, but then January happened and the conversation changed overnight. The Titans came into Baltimore as a wildcard team and leaned on Derrick Henry, who ended up running for 195 yards against a defense that couldn't get a stop when it mattered. Lamar would throw for 365 yards, along with rushing for over 100 yards, but he also tossed 2 interceptions in that game, and the offense seemed to stall on crucial drives late in the fourth quarter. He definitely deserves some of the blame because the turnovers were real and a couple of those drives needed to be finished, but the defense forced 0 turnovers and couldn't slow down Henry at all. It was a full team failure on the biggest stage, yet somehow the story became entirely about Jackson's limitations. That loss planted a seed in the national conversation that never fully went away, and can he win in the playoffs became the question that followed him into every press conference. That's the true origin of the playoff narrative, and it all started with that one game. Now, to be fair, the narrative didn't just come out of thin air because Lamar has had moments in the postseason where he clearly needed to be better. But the level of scrutiny that one loss generated compared to what he had just done in the regular season tells you a lot about how the media evaluated him differently from the start. The chip on his shoulder from draft night just got a lot heavier after that exit. And for the next 3 years, everything that came with being one of the faces of the league, the pressure, the injuries, and the constant skepticism, it was going to test him in ways the 2019 MVP race never could. The 2020 season kicked off with a milestone Jackson had never reached before he finally took down the Titans in the playoffs. During that wildcard matchup, he tore through the defense for 136 yards and a score on the ground, which managed to quiet the critics for exactly 1 week. That was the only break he got from the noise, and to date, the last interception the Ravens defense has forced in the playoffs. Everything fell apart in the divisional round against the Bills because the offense stalled out completely while Lamar struggled to find a rhythm with only 162 passing yards. Buffalo's defensive staff deserves credit for a masterclass in containment, as they effectively schemed away every explosive element that usually makes Baltimore dangerous. He finished that game with a pick 6 and left early due to a concussion. The Ravens didn't just lose 17-3, they looked entirely flat and lifeless against a Bills squad that appeared faster and much better prepared. This performance shifted the conversation from whether Jackson could win in January to a much more damaging question about whether the league had figured him out. The problem with that narrative is that it completely ignored what happened during the regular season. Lamar finished 2020 with over 2,700 passing yards and 1,000 rushing yards, marking his second consecutive year hitting that rushing milestone as a QB. No other player in NFL history had ever accomplished that feat once, yet Jackson did it back-to-back while leading the Ravens to an 11-4 record in his starts. Even though the defense was up and down, the team still managed to stack 11 wins because the offense refused to take a step back. None of those achievements got the credit they deserved because the media had already decided that January was the only month that mattered for his legacy. Then 2021 arrived and the Ravens went 7-5 when Lamar played but collapsed to an 8-9 finish overall, which was the first losing season since he took over the starting job due to his ankle injury. His passer rating dipped to 87 and his touchdowns fell to 16. But the game still showed an elite player who was simply trying to carry a roster that couldn't function without him. The following year felt like a repeat of the same frustrations. Lamar missed 6 games with a knee injury in 2022, yet he still managed to go 8-4 as a starter, while accounting for 17 touchdowns in those 12 appearances. Missing the postseason in consecutive years is a tough pill to swallow for a player of his caliber though. Then the injury-prone narrative started floating around. However, if you look at the bigger picture over those 3 seasons, the story is actually very simple. When Lamar Jackson was healthy and on the field, the Ravens were a winning football team. But the moment he went down, the entire structure collapsed. His record as a starter remained elite, while the team's record without him was bottom tier, which is the definition of a franchise player masking deep structural problems. While the public debated his ceiling, a much bigger fight was brewing behind the scenes regarding his future in Baltimore. Lamar was navigating the most important contract negotiation of his life without an agent, going head-to-head with one of the sharpest front offices in sports. In March of 2023, the football world stopped when Lamar took to Twitter to handle his own business. There was no PR team or high-priced agent to soften the blow. It was just Jackson telling everyone he had requested a trade because the Ravens weren't meeting his value. It was a wild moment to see the most dominant dual-threat QB in the world negotiating his future in real time on social media, all while every executive in the league watched from the sidelines. The Ravens used a non-exclusive franchise tag to see if anyone would bite, and while teams like the Colts and Patriots were rumored to be interested, no official offers ever came through. It seemed as though he was colluded against, especially since the Falcons were like, nah, we'll stick with Desmond Ridder. The price to acquire him was just too high for most teams to stomach, so both sides sat in a tense stalemate for weeks as the draft approached. Everything changed finally in late April when Jackson signed a massive 5-year extension worth $260 million. With $185 million guaranteed, he became one of the highest paid players in NFL history, and he did it all without paying a single cent to an agent, all while becoming the highest deal negotiated without having an agent. You have to respect the sheer confidence it takes to walk into a room alone against a professional front office and walk out with a record-breaking deal. That negotiation proved that Lamar is a man who will always bet on himself regardless of the pressure. And once the money was settled, the focus shifted back to the field and the arrival of new offensive coordinator Todd Monken. Coming off back-to-back national titles at Georgia, Monken threw out the old run-heavy philosophy and replaced it with a modern spread-out passing attack. This was a direct response to the critics who claimed Jackson was a system QB who couldn't thrive in a traditional NFL offense. And Lamar was ready to prove him wrong, again. The 2023 season turned into a loud answer to every single doubt that had been raised over the previous 3 years. Jackson set a career high by completing 67% of his passes, throwing for nearly 3,700 yards and leading the Ravens to a league-best 13-3 record. He walked away with the second MVP trophy after receiving 49 out of 50 first-place votes, making him the youngest player since the merger to win the award twice. The only person who didn't vote for him chose Josh Allen instead, but the dominance was undeniable. The most impressive part of that MVP run wasn't the trophy itself, but the way Lamar dismantled defenses from the pocket. He was winning games with his arm against the best teams in the league, proving that his passing ability was just as dangerous as his superpower on the ground. Defenses were stuck in a nightmare because they couldn't stack the box without getting burned deep, yet they couldn't play soft coverage without Jackson picking them apart underneath. The playoffs started off strong with a convincing win over the Texans, that also being Lamar's best playoff game to date. But the AFC Championship game against Kansas City became another chapter of what if. The first few drives were exciting, then it was a slugfest, and Baltimore was in a position to get back into the game late until Zay Flowers fumbled near the goal line, a mistake that completely shifted the momentum of the contest. Lamar put up 272 yards and an insane touchdown, but looked lost going against Patrick Mahomes, having multiple turnovers in that game. However, every time the world tries to count him out, Lamar comes back stronger and more refined than he was the year before. By the end of 2023, he had the massive contract, 2 MVP awards, and a resume that silenced the running back jokes forever. The only box left to check was the Super Bowl ring, and the 2024 season was supposed to be the moment that he finally reached the summit. What he actually did in 2024 was so statistically insane that it almost defies logic, even if it ended in the most painful way possible. Lamar's 2024 season stands as one of the most efficient years any QB has ever put together in NFL history. And that's not an opinion or a bias, that's just a fact. He finished the year with 4,172 passing yards and 41 touchdowns while only giving away 4 interceptions, and he added another 915 yards on the ground just for good measure. His 119.6 passer rating was the highest single season mark in league history. He became the first player ever to throw for 4,000 yards and rush for over 900 in a season, which is wild considering no one had even hit the 4,800 mark before he showed up. One of those records meant he did something entirely new, while the other required playing nearly mistake-free football, and he managed to pull off both at the exact same time. The guy who was told he couldn't actually play quarterback at this level is now one of the 3 most efficient passers to ever pick up a football, according to the most trusted metric we have. The Ravens finished the year at 12-5 and took home another AFC North title, with Jackson acting as the engine for everything they did on the field. However, when the MVP votes finally came in, he lost out to Josh Allen by a margin that people still argue about today. Josh obviously had a massive season and nobody's trying to take that away from him, but Lamar's efficiency was objectively better in almost every major category that matters. His rating was higher, his TD to interception ratio was superior, and he was gaining more yards every time he let the ball fly, all while Lamar beat him head to head that season. The fallout from that vote highlighted a massive issue that has followed Jackson since he entered the league, was that he simply isn't evaluated the same way as his peers. Then we go to the playoffs, and Baltimore handled the Steelers in the wild card before hitting a wall against Buffalo in the divisional round, where they lost at 27-25, heartbreaker. Lamar actually played the best he'd ever played consistently in the playoffs, putting up 429 yards and 4 TDs over those 2 games with a 122.5 passer rating. But 2 first-half turnovers against the Bills flipped the field and put the Ravens in a hole they couldn't escape. Mark Andrews ended up dropping a 2-point conversion late in that game that would have tied things up, and the defense struggled as they gave up 27 points without forcing a single turnover. Unfortunately, the 2025 season was about to make everything even more difficult to process. Heading into 2025, the Ravens looked like the clear favorites to win the Super Bowl. Lamar was healthy, Derrick Henry was back in the backfield, and the offensive roster was so in sync that the offense looked completely unstoppable when they were in rhythm. Baltimore was actually the highest scoring team in the league through the first 3 weeks, averaging 37 points a game, but then everything changed during a Week 4 trip to Kansas City. Lamar went down with a hamstring injury during that game, and from that point on, the entire season started spiraling in a direction nobody expected. He only missed 4 games total, but the real problem wasn't the time he spent on the sideline. It was the fact he was trying to play through a rotating door of injuries to his knee, ankle, toe, and back, all while having one of the worst defenses in the league. You could see the toll it was taking on his game because his rushing attempts plummeted from 9 per game down to just 5, which marked the lowest of his entire career. Defenses started pinning their ears back and dropping everyone into coverage because they didn't fear him breaking a long run anymore, and the results were ugly. During a rough 6-game stretch in November and December, Jackson only averaged 177 passing yards and threw more interceptions than TDs. He actually went 3 straight games without a single passing score for the first time ever, marking the longest cold streak of his professional life at the exact moment the team needed him the most. The Ravens ended up finishing 8-9 and missed the postseason entirely. Shout out Tyler Loop. It didn't help that the offensive line was a disaster though, as he was sacked on nearly 10% of his dropbacks and faced pressure on 37% of his plays. When your QB is already banged up and getting hit on every other snap, you don't need a crystal ball to figure out why the season failed. The situation got so bad that John Harbaugh was finally fired after 18 seasons in Baltimore. But even in a year that felt like a total loss, there was a moment in the season finale against Pittsburgh that reminded everyone who Jackson really is. With the Ravens trailing in the fourth quarter, he dropped back and uncorked a 50-yard touchdown to Zay Flowers, then followed it up with a 64-yard strike on the very next drive. According to ESPN research, only one other player in the history of the NFL had ever thrown 2 go-ahead touchdowns of that length in a single fourth quarter. That was Lamar Jackson playing through pain in his worst statistical season, still finding a way to be special when the game was on the line. Baltimore obviously still lost that game, but it was nice to see Lamar still had it. So let's put everything on the table and look at what the numbers actually tell us. His career passer rating sits at 102.2, which makes him tied for first all time with Aaron Rodgers, and he currently holds the record for most rushing yards by a QB with over 6,500. Lamar is also the only player at his position to ever post 2 1,000-yard rushing seasons, all while holding the NFL record for the most perfect passer ratings in a single year with 4. On top of that, he has 7 career games where he finished with more touchdown passes than incompletions, which is more than anyone else in league history. He even became the first quarterback to ever throw 40 touchdowns while giving up fewer than 5 interceptions in a single season. The thing is, every single time someone said he couldn't do something, he went out and did it anyway. People claimed he couldn't play quarterback, yet he's played the position better than almost anyone ever has. And they said he couldn't throw, but now he's tied with Aaron Rodgers in passer rating. The one thing he hasn't done is win a Super Bowl, and I'm confident he'll win one. He's only 28 years old, and so the final chapter of his story isn't written yet. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, and subscribe if you're new.